Hey folks, it's Brooklyn Lou the Skeptic, former evangelical, now atheist. And today I have a special guest, and I want to be talking to him about the Shroud of Turin. Very, very interesting topic, one that people are still interested in. The Shroud of Turin offers many people an anchor to their faith, and yet many people think that it's a hoax. All right. His name is Jordan. He has a great channel called Reason to Doubt. So let me bring him in and we can talk about the Shroud of Turin. There we go. Cool. Just wanted to get you bigger.
Sure.
So Jordan, about the Shroud of Turin.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Have you put a little time in learning a little bit about it? Because honestly, I don't know much about it, but I want my viewers to learn a little more about it.
Yeah, I kind of against my will have learned a lot about the Shroud of Turin. I originally did an episode on it on my channel, and it was kind of like, it was one of those times when me and the person I was doing the channel with at the time, Jared, we didn't really have a lot of time to prep. We wanted to put something out, and we were just like, this thing seems kind of ridiculous. We'll just kind of riff on it. And that led to like a whole bunch of people being like, oh, you should look more into it. And fast forward, like, I don't know how many episodes I've done and dozens of hours and so many papers. There's so much on the Shroud of Turin. Spoiler, I'm pretty sure it's not authentic. So
yeah. I don't think it is either, but, I'm interested in why do you think people do think it's authentic? Like, a lot of people really find it to be an anchor to their faith. In fact, I've talked to one Christian on my channel quite often, and that's a big point to why he believes in Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think part of it is that it is a thing that you could look at and hypothetically touch and see that they see as miraculous evidence. So it's something like concrete they can point to. Because I think a lot of people have a yearning for stronger evidence, but they don't often get it for miracles, particularly the single miracle that undergirds their entire religion. And so if they can have something that they can point to, I think that's very compelling. And it's got just enough mystery that you can fit some uncertainty in there. So I think
that's exactly kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
It's like it gives people a reason to believe as opposed to the name of your channel, A Reason to Doubt, right? They're looking to believe something, and then they find this to be something that reinforces their belief. And I think it gives them comfort.
I know many religious people who are big believers in the Shroud of Turin. I know many religious people who are not. I don't know of anyone who is been persuaded by the Shroud of Turin. Like someone who is coming in as someone who isn't already convinced of the truth of the religious claims to begin with. I don't see anyone. I mean, there's a lot of people. I'm sure somebody has, but I don't see it as like all that common that someone looks at this cloth is like, oh, I'm convinced, But for people who aren't aware of the Shroud of Turin, I mean, I don't know why you're watching a Shroud of Turin video on YouTube. It's kind of a niche thing, but just in case you manage to get here and don't know what we're talking about, the Shroud of Turin is a linen cloth that measures about 4.5 by 1 meter or so. And it has a image, kind of a faint brownish image of a man front and back. So it's almost like the cloth is like up over the head and then kind of, so the person was like laying on it and then they would have draped it over the top is how it's presented, right? So it's got front and back image of a naked man who appears to have been killed violently. He's got blood and stuff all over him. And this is believed to be the image of Jesus Christ post crucifixion. The one of the more remarkable things about it is that if you look at it just with your eyeballs, like you can see there's a dude on it, but it's kind of faint. It's a little hard to it's not super clear. If you take the negative of it, it's actually way clearer. It's way easier to see, and that's kind of striking. So most of the images you'll see that are like black and white, that you're actually looking at the photo negative of it.
I've seen that image. I mean, that's the one I think that's most common. Mm-hmm. And you can clearly see it's a man.
Sure.
Right? Doesn't he have a crown of thorns on him?
He has like wounds on his forehead and like blood in his hair. So the proponents assert that that's evidence that the person pictured was at one point wearing a crown of thorns.
So he doesn't actually have a crown of thorns.
He doesn't have it in the image itself, but like, right. I mean, the story, it's very easy to come up with narratives why he wouldn't have it. Well, I mean, because at this point, the body has been prepared by the women. He's been anointed with oils. He would have been cleaned up to some degree. And so, that would be the explanation. I mean, there's basically no question that this is intended to be Jesus, whether it is actually Jesus' image or not, whether it was made through some miraculous means by Jesus himself, or if it was made by an artist. It's pretty much a given that this is intended to be Jesus. The question is, is it actually?
Now, when you were researching this, what did you find out about the shroud? And I would think that a lot of the stuff that people believe about it was prior to having the ability to actually examine it. It's kind of like a little bit of, there's things that we could do today that maybe you couldn't do when this was new, this cloth, right?
Sure.
So I'm wondering, when you were looking into this, why didn't you think it was the burial cloth of Jesus Christ?
So probably the most famous examination of it was the radiocarbon dating that happened in the early 80s, I believe. And this was probably the thing that launched it back into the modern consciousness. This is not like it was unknown before then, obviously. It's been revered for centuries. But I think for modern audiences, that's what really sparked the kind of modern interest we see in it. So, late 80s, it was 88 that the radiocarbon dating was done. And so the thing that made it so remarkable, the thing that got all the headlines, is the radiocarbon dating dated it to the Middle Ages, between 1260 and 1390, right? Which is obviously way past when Jesus was around. And I think the one thing that stands out to me as to why there's a lot of different pieces of evidence that I can point to and we can talk about. The radiocarbon dating is something I'm particularly interested in as a nuclear engineer. But I think what's most striking to me, just kind of zooming out, is how multiple lines of evidence or multiple coincidences kind of show up in the 14th century. So, for instance, the first documented history of the shroud is in 1354, right? That's when it shows up in history in France, which is exactly when the cloth is dated to, right? So it doesn't date all that much earlier than you would expect for a cloth that shows up in history in the 14th century. And so it's just things like that, for example, that all kind of independently point at the Middle Ages as at least plausible, and very little that points in the other way.
Now, obviously, there's a big difference between the Middle Ages, 1300s, 1400s, and when Jesus was supposed to be crucified.
Right.
Not even close. It's not like really close. It's definitely not even close. But why do people still think, after hearing about the carbon dating, why do you suppose they still think it's real?
So I think that there's enough doubt being put into the carbon dating to make people kind of dismiss that in their minds. And if you set that aside, then, I mean, it is somewhat mysterious. So it has some interesting properties. For example, the image itself is very, very thin. It's a discoloration on just the outer like couple millimeters of the fibrils. It's a discoloration not in shade but in density. So some fibers are discolored and some are not. And the more densely packed those discolored fibers are, that's what makes it appear darker or lighter, right? And that how to do that with 14th century technology is not a thing we know. Nobody knows how this thing was made. There's a lot of ideas, but nobody has been able to reproduce it in all its particulars. Combine that with stories of artifacts that go back to the Byzantine Empire, to the ancient Near East, or I guess not ancient, but to the Near East. And there's enough there that you can kind of weave a narrative such that it still works. And then they'll point to some lines of evidence that have since been debunked, but it's not widely known or what understood. Things like the pollen analysis, which people might be aware of, things like the limestone analysis, all of which we can get into. So like if you can kind of set the radiocarbon aside, and there are problems with it, so I understand why people might want to set it aside, then I think you can, I think that's how to get there.
Now, people I've spoke to that believe that it is Jesus, they'll say that mystery that you're speaking about, that those mysteries are because it was something supernatural that happened, right? Something that was a one-time occurrence that who knows what science was involved with resurrecting a person.
Right.
If that could ever happen, it must be unusual. So they kind of point to that as the reason they think it's authentic. Right? I find that interesting, that they look at that and they go, oh, well, yeah, we can't explain it because it was some sort of a supernatural occurrence.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very common pattern you see in people who are of religious persuasion who feel the need to have an evidence or kind of show naturalistic evidence for their supernatural beliefs. That's not all people, but there's often this like logical leap they make. Looking at the Shroud of Turin in particular, but it's not unique to the Shroud of Turin. They'll say, we don't know how this was done. Therefore, I do know how it was done, and it's God. Yeah. And that's a leap that they're not justified at all. Like, we don't know. All that can mean is we don't know, right? Now, certainly, if it were in fact supernatural, then it wouldn't appear, well, okay. God, if he's the almighty creator of the universe, can do whatever he wants. So if he wants to miraculously make it a painting, then he could do that, I guess. But like, leaving aside that kind of thing, if it were supernatural, you'd expect it to be difficult to explain, right? But it's not the case where, and this is often how they'll present it, that scientists from all across the world have poured all of their resources and all of scientific knowledge into it, and they've been unable to discover the thing. Basically, we've exhausted all possibilities, therefore it has to be supernatural. And that is just not the case, right?
Yeah.
Moreover, it is also not the case that medieval people, or even ancient people for that matter, were stupid or unintelligent or like not clever. Like, there's a lot of things they figured out how to do that we to this day don't know how to do. One of my favorite examples of this is Roman concrete, which we only very recently, like in the last decade or two, figured out how it works. Roman concrete is amazing because it holds up to abuse for millennia. Like, you can go and see aqueducts built by the Romans that still exist today. Meanwhile, the baseball stadium that's not even as old as I am is falling apart, in my hometown, right?
Yeah.
And for millennia, people did not know why. It was unknown how the Romans achieved this. And this is something that just exists right there. Anybody could go look at it and examine it if they wanted to. And there's a clear incentive to figuring it out, right? And yet it took millennia to figure it out. The reason is that they had chunks of limestone in the concrete. And so when it cracked, the water would get into the limestone, which would dissolve and kind of self-heal it. That's why it works. But like, if you were asking me this question 15 years ago, then I'd have to say, we don't know why. Well, does that mean it's God? I mean, no, right. It just means we don't know, right?
That's a big God of the gaps fallacy. And in this case, I guess we could say Jesus of the gap, right?
Right.
There's an unknown, there is some unknown quality about the shroud. So I guess because of that, that can be used as a reason for someone to believe who kind of falls in line to the God of the gaps type of fallacy.
Right.
You know?
Now, there are, specifically related to the radiocarbon dating, there are some points that would be miraculous if they were true. So there's the hypothesis. Let me back up a little bit. People who are proponents of the Shroud of Turin being authentic have to deal with the radiocarbon dating, right? They have to explain away these results. And basically, there's when you do radiocarbon dating, you're testing how much radioactive carbon-14 there is in the thing. It only works for creatures that were once alive because the atmosphere has some radioactive carbon in it. Plants breathe that carbon in, we eat the plants, and so it gets into our body, right? But when you die, you stop doing that. And so the amount of carbon that's in your body when you die decays away, and you can test how much there is, and that tells you when the thing died, right? Linen, here's my cat, the cloth being made of linen. The flax plant would be a good candidate for radiocarbon dating. And so there's enough carbon in it such that if it were to have died in the 14th century, it would have decayed away to today. And so why is there all this so much more carbon than there would be if the plant had been cut down in the 30s CE around the time Jesus died, right? Because that would have been 1,000 more years for the radiocarbon to dissipate and decay. So one of the most common answers that I hear is a idea put forth by several people, but probably most famously by fellow nuclear engineer Bob Rucker. And he proposes that Jesus engaged in interdimensional travel. And when his body dissipated, it shot neutrons up and down. And try not to go into physics too deep. Basically, when neutrons hit nitrogen, which there'd be some trace amounts in the cloth, it absorbs it and turns into carbon-14. So basically, it's producing extra carbon-14, and that's why there's all this extra, right? And there's many, many, many problems with that thing, right? With that answer, that problem, or that idea. But the one thing it does have going for it is that it is testable. It is a testable prediction because the chest area of the cloth, if that were true, would be very much more radioactive than the foot area. So with the Geiger counter that I have on my bookcase over here, I could test it and disprove this. So there is a testable prediction being made at least, right? I'll give them that, but obviously it hasn't been disconfirmed.
Now, have scientists and people that do more intense research, have they had the ability to examine the shroud?
Some. So most intensely, there was the STURP group, STURP, which stands for Shroud of Turin something research something. I don't remember the full, but STURP is the name. And they were in the late 70s, and they were a group of researchers that came in and were given access to the shroud. They were able to do tests to it. I believe it was a week that they had to do it back in the 70s, and they did a lot of cool stuff. One of the things they did was examine the image area, and they saw that it's probably not paint, or at least not liquid paint, because they failed to find pigments in the cloth, and they also failed to find meniscus marks. So if a fluid had flowed through the fibers, you know how when you have water, the water tips up at the edge because of surface tension? It would do the same thing if it were on the fibers, and they don't detect that. Therefore, it doesn't seem to be at least liquid dye that was used. So they kind of ruled out some things. And they did a lot of really cool research. So the answer to your question is yes. And since then, scientists have scrutinized those results. They scrutinized the later radiocarbon results. But critically, what they don't have is access to the Shroud of Turin to go back and check it again. So while a bunch of scientists did some really cool stuff back in the 70s, science has moved on in the 50 plus years since that happened. There's a lot more we could do. And there's a lot of follow-on experiments that people who are interested in this would like to do if we had access to it, but we don't. I mean, and it's understandable why the Catholic Church doesn't want a bunch of people cutting up their holy relic. I get it, but understandable or not, it's still the case.
So it's the Catholic Church that owns the shroud?
Yes. So historically, it was owned by a noble family in Italy, but that family has gifted it to the Catholic Church. So the current owner is the current Pope. And the Catholic Church's stance regarding the Shroud of Turin is that it is an icon. I've been recently talking to a nice Catholic woman who doesn't believe the Shroud of Turin is real, and she's very passionate about these terms, so I'm going to try to get them right. Basically, it is not considered a relic like the Catholics will revere certain objects as having, for lack of a better term, magical properties where, they can do miracles and stuff like that. So those are like authentic things. And if this were authentically the shroud of the shroud of Jesus, then it would be such a relic. The Catholic Church does not regard it as that. They regard it as an icon, which is basically a pretty piece of art that makes people feel a certain way about Jesus. So it's like, it's a nice thing. It's great. It inspires faith. That's awesome. That's all it is, according to the Catholic Church. And
I mean, I could understand that. Sure. I mean, it sounds reasonable from the Catholic perspective. At least it doesn't seem like they're stretching it beyond what it should be. But,
yeah, I mean, if someone wants to think the Shroud of Turin makes them feel a certain way about the religion, cool. Like, whatever. That's fine. Art does that. Like, I have no problems with that, And
no, I don't either, really. I mean, ultimately, I don't have a problem with people, like, wanting to find some comfort in, something to reinforce their belief. I just think that as a skeptic and an atheist person, I mean, I want more than just to feel comfortable,
at a personal level, I care far, far more about how someone treats other people and what their beliefs say about that than about whether or not Jesus rose from the dead. I find the subject interesting, so I'm happy to talk about it. And I find it interesting just, from an intellectual point of view, but brass tacks, I don't care. I would much prefer somebody be a Christian and feed the homeless and do good things than that person be an atheist who's a jerk, right? I would much prefer that. And also, I personally would much rather live in a world where the Shroud of Turin was actually Jesus's burial shroud, because that would be so neat. It would be so cool to have this thing from history, from a period of history I actually find super interesting. So that would be neat. I don't live in that world, but I would like to. Yeah.
And another thing that I've thought about it when I'm thinking about the shroud is, if God was real, why in the world would he leave it mysterious like that? I mean, you would think he would make it very obvious, right? Very, very detectable by science.
So this is actually...
they could say, well, this is verified, so that if someone rejects it, they're rejecting at least the science of the time.
This is actually one of the reasons the Catholic Church does not endorse it as a relic, because it hasn't persisted very well over time. If you look at it, there's big holes in it because it's been exposed to several fires. At one point, the church it was in caught fire, and the silver inlay of the wooden box it was kept in melted and burned through parts of the shroud, right? And if, like you said, if this is intended by the almighty creator of the universe to be the thing that shows that Jesus rose from the dead, right? First of all, why is it this vague kind of indistinct brownish stain, right? He could make a full multicolor, multimedia thing if he wanted, right?
Right.
But okay, for whatever reasons that are inscrutable to me, he decided that a vague brownish stain was the preferred medium. Okay. The least he could do is preserve it through time. And again, this is God. He could do that. It would be trivial to make this cloth resistant to fire, not damaged by mold. It would be so easy. And he obviously hasn't. And so that is actually one of the reasons the Catholic Church points to, because in their estimation, if it were a genuine relic, it would be resistant to the damage from time, because God would make it so.
Protect it, right? God may protect it.
Sure. Now, of course, one of the perhaps advantages, I guess you could look at it that way, of invoking the supernatural in this way is you can basically justify more or less anything. So why did God make it this way? Mysterious ways. Who knows? For his greater purpose. I've heard people argue that God needs to leave room for doubt in order for people to be genuine in their faith, because if it were certain, it would be like forcing you. That makes no sense to me, because like, even if we just look at it from within their own religious tradition, Satan is 100% certain God exists, and he had no problem, bucking the authority. So, but whatever,
Yeah, I mean, that type of thinking, I clearly reject that type of thinking personally. That there would be a God that was making things mysterious on purpose. Yeah.
Divine hiddenness is, I think, a fairly compelling argument. But it plays in here because the Shroud of Turin could easily be made. It would be trivial for a deity to make it in such a way that the cloth, when radiocarbon dated, would date to the time of Jesus, or that it would date all over the place, like be completely undateable. That would be another thing that would again be trivial for a god to do if he were so inclined. And yet, the way he chose to do it apparently is to tweak it just enough so the radiocarbon dating says that it shows up about the time it shows up in history. Which, like, at that point, it seems like he's almost trying to trick us.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm seeing. It's like, if you buy all that, it is literally like God playing a trick.
Yeah.
Well, you have to believe in me, even though it doesn't all add up.
So yeah, my initial impression of the Shroud of Turin after starting is basically unchanged from my later impression. One thing I will concede that I thought was going to be easy. I thought the image formation was going to be easy to figure out. And I was wrong. I have no clue how it was made. But none of the arguments that have been put forward are compelling. And the Shroud of Turin proponents are just inexhaustible. Like they will not stop. No matter how many times they are shown to be wrong, it doesn't matter. It's always just the next thing. So like one of their favorite things is the pollen on the shroud. So there is pollen on the shroud, and there was an individual who at one point insisted, he was a scientist, he was a botanist, and he said that this pollen could only come from Jerusalem, and therefore the shroud was in Jerusalem, right? Which, first of all, doesn't even follow. Like, just because there's pollen on the shroud that was from Jerusalem doesn't mean it was ever in Jerusalem. People came from all over Europe and the Mediterranean to see this thing, But it turns out later on, other botanists have examined his work, and it turns out he was just lying. It was just bullshit. Like it's the pollen that he was pointing to. You can't get any more specific than a broad family of grasses that is present all throughout Europe and the Mediterranean. So like, it's just nonsense. It's complete bunk. And yet, you hear it all the time.
Now, is there like tours where people pay to go see this thing?
Yes, it is on display in Turin, in a particular church. I don't know the name of the church, but you can go. I don't know if they charge to see it. I honestly don't know. If they do, I don't think it would be very much. I haven't heard anyone complaining about the cost to see it. So
I mean,
it is
thinking
like
about business in this world, it would be likely to, in my way of thinking, that probably they charge something to go see it.
I mean, maybe I get the impression, I haven't looked into it, but my vibe is that it drives some tourism, not a lot. Like the Catholic Church probably makes some money off having it, not a ton. Just kind of, not like they're hurting for money. You can basically see it behind glass, just like you'd see like, the Constitution or the Magna Carta.
Yeah, it's definitely not out in the open. It's got to be covered, right?
Not anymore. Used to be back in the day, all kinds of people go touch it, and they'd, occasionally cut pieces off it and stuff like that, but not anymore.
Well, I guess I would say it's a kind of cool thing.
Oh,
I mean,
it's a very cool piece of medieval art. It first of all, it's art form that, so far as I know, is unique, at least in the historical record. I don't know of anything exactly like it. And so it's very cool. It's just not authentic. I mean, even if you just look at the image, and think about it, it doesn't make sense as an image of a person. So, for example, the image is like as you'd see a person, like that, but his hands are covering his genitals. Just they're stretched just enough to give Jesus modesty. Now, which totally makes sense for a piece of religious art, right? But if it's actually like a dude buried, that is kind of the body wouldn't stay like that, right?
But Jordan, maybe God wanted nobody to see Jesus' genitals.
Maybe they didn't want to be embarrassed. Maybe it's not acting very much. I don't know. Yeah. And so it's just stuff like that over and over. That is just like, it's just convenient. I've heard it asserted that the fact that the person is naked means that it wouldn't be religious art, because they would never show Jesus naked. Which, if you just Google medieval Jesus naked, like, you can just find page after page after page of Jesus being naked in art. Like, it's just like, people just say things. I don't know.
So you do think then that people made this on purpose to present it as Jesus?
Sure. I mean, I don't know how it was made, and so I can't say with confidence, but like, it seems the most plausible explanation is that it was made by an artist with the intent that it would be Jesus. At the time in history, religious like artifacts and fake relics were all over the place. You could buy enough pieces of the true cross on the streets to make 10 different crosses. It's like, it was like a common industry in medieval Europe. And so, given that there were icons of Jesus as a crucified person all throughout the country, nothing exactly like the Shroud, to be clear. But the idea that an artist would make a piece of religious art in the highly religious Middle Ages and then pass it off as authentic, it is extremely mundane. It's a thing we know happened thousands of times. So,
well, the person who made it, or people, whoever did this, they might not have had that same intent.
Sure.
I mean, it's possible they had a different intention.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know who made it. That we have no record whatsoever. There's when the Shroud of Turin showed up, there was a bishop who claimed he knew who made it and that it was a fraud, but he doesn't say who it was or anything about it, and I'm not super persuaded by his writing anyway. But regardless, I mean, for some purpose, it could have been to make money because he sold this religious art. It could have just been he wanted to make a picture of Jesus as a religious person, which is a thing artists do. Like, who knows? Who knows why he did it? But for some reason or another, he made a picture of Jesus, and it got into the hands of nobility in France, and went on from there.
Well, there's no real indication, at least scientifically, that it would even be Jesus. It could be any man from that time, right?
I mean, technically, it could be a picture of some other probably crucified dead guy with long hair who has like wounds on his forehead and a stab wound in his side. Like, I mean, yeah, I guess technically it could be, but like, if you hear horses, you should think, if you hear hoofbeats, you think horses, not zebras, right? If I see a picture in the Middle Ages, in France, which is, dominated by Catholicism, if I see a picture of a man who looks like he was crucified with a stab wound in his side and wounds on his head, that's Jesus, right? Like, who else is it gonna be? I guess technically it could be someone else, but like, come on, like, it's probably Jesus. We could just concede that.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah. Just like there is blood on the Shroud of Turin, and it's been tested, and the best that when you do the testing, they technically cannot determine with certainty that it is actually human blood. The best they can say is that it's from a primate. which fair enough. But if it's blood from a primate in Europe, it's a human, right? Like come on, are they importing chimps? Like, come on. So, and it's not like human blood would have been hard to find. So, stuff like that.
I will say, and I definitely am not a believer that it's Jesus or what Jesus rose from the dead or any of that. That's just, to me, preposterous to think Jesus rose from the dead. All right. But I will say, if people made that, they did a good job, because here we are so many years later, and it's still something that people are attracted to and find value in.
Yeah,
so if it's artwork, it kind of succeeded.
Yeah, for sure, it succeeded. Whether it was intended to be a forgery or not, like whether the person had the intent of convincing people this was actually Jesus' burial shroud, or whether the artist's intent was just to make a pretty picture of Jesus. Either way, they succeeded with flying colors, because people through the centuries have been enamored with the cloth and have believed it is the authentic cloth of Jesus. So it was a smashing success, whichever way they were trying to go.
Now, the carbon dating thing, all right? I hear from people who are like creationists, and they will poo-poo the carbon dating just as a means to date things. They'll say, "Oh no, it's not accurate." All right. What's your understanding of carbon dating? Is it accurate?
It is extremely accurate. It's extremely reliable. It's been tested tens, if not hundreds of thousands of times. It is one of the most reliable tests we have for the region, for the things it's good at. So there are some caveats. Just like any other measuring method, it's not going to be good in every single situation, right? So, for example, just as an analogy, if you have a scale to measure weight, you're going to use a different scale whether you're measuring apples or trucks, right? Like, you need a different scale. Not that the one scale is broken, it's just that they don't work for the thing you want it to, right? Carbon dating, it's just like any other method, has limitations. There are things it can't do. For instance, it can only date things that were once alive, because the whole premise is that living things take in radioactive carbon from their environment, right? So if it wasn't alive, carbon dating tells you nothing about it. So there's one limitation. It also requires that the thing get its radioactive carbon from the atmosphere, from the air. And that is not true of all living things. There are things that were aquatic, living in certain regions underwater where they don't get their radioactive carbon directly from the atmosphere, and so carbon dating doesn't work for those. And that's just a limitation of the method that's understood and known. So it has limitations, but outside of that, it's extremely reliable. They will often point to what the creationists will often want to do, not just with radiocarbon dating. Sorry, not just with radiocarbon dating, but radiometric dating in general, is they'll point to the outliers. They'll point to the times when it missed, when it got it wrong or whatever, and no test, no matter how reliable, is going to be 100% reliable. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be outliers. There's going to be times when the data doesn't fit, because that's how the real world works. But they want to point to oh, look at this one outlier, and then ignore the 100,000 other ones that weren't outliers. You know what I mean? Yeah. So in order for carbon dating not to work, it would require that physics as we know it basically doesn't work, because it's the only things you need to know are the rate of decay for carbon-14, which is extremely well known. It's something you can measure directly. So rates of decay do not change over time. I'm trying not to go into exceptions, but none of the exceptions are relevant here, so it doesn't matter. So you need to know that. You need to know how much carbon was in the thing to begin with, which is basically just whatever the atmospheric carbon was at the time. And so as long as you know those two things, it's just there's no way it could be wrong, basically.
Yeah. So is it safe to say pretty much in the science community that the shroud is considered not to be the burial cloth of Jesus?
Well, in the science community, I think most scientists would say, what's the Shroud of Turin? Like, it's just not a thing that they care about or know about. Like, outside of the the people who care about it a lot, it's just not a thing that anyone cares about. So, like, scientists writ large are largely unaware of it. And the people who do publish on it are people who believe in the Shroud of Turin and its authenticity. So, like, if you go read peer-reviewed papers on the Shroud of Turin, which they do exist, I would wager most of the people writing them think the Shroud of Turin is authentic. But that's like selection bias. The people who are inclined to spend their careers studying this one artifact, are the very people who think it's authentic, right? So I wouldn't say that scientists think it's inauthentic. I think that science has nothing to say on the matter. To the extent scientists have ever examined it, no conclusion they've come to would lead necessarily to its being authentic.
And it's interesting when you said, physics would have to be wrong, let's say, for carbon dating not to work, right?
Right.
Same thing can be said about the resurrection if you believe it. I mean, physics cannot be accurate if a human body resurrected and came back to life and went up into heaven, right?
Well, I'll push back on that. So for radiocarbon dating not to work, physics as we know it would need to be wrong because it's something we can do over and over and over and over again. And it's almost always proved to be correct within a margin of error, right? And so for all of those results to be correct, but for it not to somehow be reliable, like a lot of things would go wrong. With the resurrection, for Jesus to resurrect naturally, like due to natural processes, then yes.
Yeah. Well, that's all we really know, isn't it?
I would say that physics would not necessarily have to be incorrect for the almighty creator of the universe to come and do a thing and monkey with things. Like that says nothing about physics because presumably God isn't limited.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But it would have to be defied.
Yeah, sure. So God would have to break the laws of physics, which presumably God can do, and cause Jesus to rise from the dead if he were so inclined. Yeah. So now, that said, I think that whenever you're looking at an explanation, even if you think God is real, even because I used to be a Christian, just like I think you were from your intro.
I was, yeah.
Now I was a young Earth creationist and everything, and so like even if I come to a claim as a person who believes the supernatural is real, most of the time it's not supernatural, right? Most things are not. Most things are just the laws of physics working as they normally do. Even most miracle claims are not real, even if you think miracles happen. Because they're rare by nature, right? And so even if you accept the premise that the supernatural could be real, you should start with with your prior probability with what you think before you look at the evidence that this miracle is likely not true, and then only come to the persuasion that it is true when you have excellent evidence, basically enough to overcome that prior. Now, if you take away believing in the supernatural to start with, for me to be convinced that Jesus rose from the dead, I would have to first be convinced the supernatural can exist, or alternatively, the evidence for Jesus' resurrection would have to be so excellent such that in and of itself it demonstrated that, right? And it just isn't. It just isn't anywhere close to that. The only thing we have is we have good evidence that the person existed. We have good evidence that people after he died believed things, but people believe things that aren't true all the time. It's an extremely common thing, and people found religions based on things that aren't true. And this is something that every Christian should believe because, well, I won't say every Christian, but most Christians, the ones who don't believe in the truth of other religions, they would agree that the miracles of Islam are not authentic. They're based on stories that weren't real, or the miracles of Mormonism for if you're not a Mormon, or the miracles of Hinduism. Like, okay, well, just apply that same thinking, but now it's your thing, Yeah.
But they get around that by saying, well, those particular miracles could have been caused by Satan. I don't know if you've heard that before.
Sure. I mean, I have heard that. And like, at that point, if someone is willing to go to that length, then like, okay, cool. If that's what you want to believe. But I mean, you could also invoke a divine hiddenness argument in that case. It's like, why is God allowing Satan to deceive people to that degree? But like, okay, fine. If someone is that hard up to believe what they want to believe, then like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I guess,
Yeah. So
I personally,
a lot
don't
of Christians believe that Satan is able to do supernatural things.
Yes.
Right?
A lot of Christians are effectively polytheistic because they believe in at least two gods, the almighty, more powerful God, and then the lesser God of Satan.
And they even call him in the Bible the God of this world. Satan is described as the God of this world at some point in the Bible.
Right. But again, like, do you take God as all powerful or not? Like, is God in fact all powerful? Because if God is in fact all powerful, then presumably anything Satan does is he can only do things that God says he should be allowed to do, right? And so even if you agree with all of that, in order for Satan to be allowed to provide enough counter evidence such that it would persuade us away, that is in essence, in effect, God deceiving us, which I'm perfectly comfortable if I die and I wake up and find out that I was wrong, and God tells me the reason that I was wrong is because he, as the almighty creator of the universe, wanted me to be wrong. Well, then I had no hope. Okay, cool. I'm fine if the reason I'm wrong is because an almighty deity conspired to make me wrong. Cool. Yeah. Like, I feel comfortable in that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. Yeah. Right? But I kind of think that people are looking for reasons to believe because belief gives them comfort, makes them feel good about the world, about themselves, about eternity. So they're looking for reasons to believe. And that's, I guess, why the Shroud is so appealing.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people just don't care at all. Like they believe because their parents believed, and they're just kind of like, it's not that important to them, and they just kind of go through life or whatever. I think that's where most people fall. The people who do care more, I think that there's a natural inclination among people to want a big explanation for big things, and so when they see something like the universe, it's big and magnificent, and therefore it must have a big explanation, right? They see something like the Shroud of Turin, and it seems to be this mysterious artifact, and therefore it has to have a big explanation. But like, that's not how the world works, though. Sometimes it just is what it is, Sometimes the universe is this way because that's how the laws of physics said it would be. There's nothing more to it. Yes. and so like, it's kind of like, but again, I go back to you don't have to believe the Shroud of Turin is real. You don't have to abandon your belief in God to reject the Shroud of Turin as real. And all you have to do is approach this miracle claim the same way you approach any other claim in your life, right? If someone from down the street told you that they cut off their arm and it magically grew back because of the power of prayer, no matter how devout a Christian you are, you're going to probably start in a position of doubt from that claim, right? Because more likely he's lying or mistaken. Okay. Mm-hmm. Likewise with the Shroud. I mentioned the neutron hypothesis, for example. You have basically two competing hypotheses. Either Jesus engaged in interdimensional travel that had to a burst of neutrons and did all this other stuff, or one lab was a little bit better at cleaning their sample than the other two. Now, which of those is more plausible? Even if you think the supernatural is real, which of those two things is more plausible? It is clearly that the lab was better at cleaning, right? That's all you have to accept. And then you can just say, okay, the Shroud of Turin is a pretty piece of artwork. I'm going to go worship Jesus another way. And fine, cool. Knock yourself out, Donate to your local homeless shelter and we'll be cool,
So last thing, just to summarize, in all the research you did on the Shroud of Turin, All right. And looking into it, trying to be unbiased, I suppose, right? You're trying to look at it for what it is.
So I obviously have bias. I think in the case of the Shroud of Turin, I would like it to be authentic, but my approach whenever I approach something, particularly for the channel, but just as a skeptic in general, is I'm aware that I don't believe in the supernatural. So if I were to have a bias, it would likely to be against the supernatural thing. So what I do first is I look for the best arguments I can find in favor of the thing against what I would naturally believe, right? I want that to be the first thing I see, because humans also have a tendency to anchor to the first thing they see. And so I'm trying to use my biases against myself, and so I try to seek out the best arguments I can. And I try to disprove what I would normally believe. That's the attitude I try to have going in. No human is free of bias, but to the greatest extent I can be, that's what I try to do.
You're definitely saying things I agree with. I don't think a human being can be totally unbiased, but I think we have to put methodology in to our thinking and our science that at least makes things less biased, or very close to as unbiased as we can get them.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. I mean, I don't think, we're human beings. We're going to have some thoughts that pop in that may be biased,
Yeah. I mean, that's part of why the scientific method exists. It's part of why we have the process of peer review. These tools exist to make it more difficult for bias to be the reason results carry forward. Even then, it's not perfect, but it's the best tool we've discovered. And my survey of all the peer-reviewed research has found that the image is mysterious. I don't know of any way to create it. No one has been able to explain how it's created. However, there's nothing innately magical about it. It is in the realm of things that humans can do, even if we don't know exactly how they did it in this case. And everything else about it, when it showed up in history, the radiocarbon dating, the radiocarbon dating does have flaws. They are not flaws that make it so that extra carbon-14 goes away. But you still have to explain that. The weaving pattern, just everything about it points to it being a piece of medieval art.
Very good. And I learned a lot. I mean, like I said, I'm not someone who has studied the Shroud. That's why I was so grateful to have you.
Well, if anyone is interested in the Shroud of Turin, my channel is still up. It's not super active right now, but it still does exist. So you can go to Reason to Doubt. You'll see the guy with the bow tie. I have I have a bunch of videos on the Shroud, but two main playlists. There's the Shroud of Turin series, which I take basically all the evidence from describing what the Shroud of Turin is and basically the whole argument from start to finish. And then I have a second series on the radiocarbon dating specifically, where I do a deep dive on the carbon dating and I examine every major counter argument to the carbon dating being accurate that I could find, and explain why those and basically try to present what I think is the most compelling explanation for that.
Hey, anyone watching, definitely go visit Jordan, Reason to Doubt. Support his channel, even if he's not active right at the moment.
I still read every comment. So if you comment, I'll just listen.
That's a good thing. I appreciate that. I do the same thing. I try to read everything.
Yeah.
Right, because I think it's important. If you're putting something out there, you might as well see what other people have to think.
Yeah, I try to do that because I want to hear what people are saying about the things I said. Also, because I work very hard to make my channel, especially when it's active, but even now, a safe and welcoming place for marginalized people, and that's not going to happen unless you police your comments. So.
Yeah, I think your channel is really good. I watched some videos. I think you're fact-based.
I certainly try to be. Hopefully, at some point in the near future, the boot of capitalism will be lifted from my neck and I'll have time to go back to making videos.
Anyway, Jordan, thank you so much, and really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good one.
Okay.